So what's causing this suffering?
Ultra-processed food.
Ultra-processed food.
Processed food.
Ultra-processed foods.
Processed foods.
Ultra-processed foods.
Ultra-processed food.
About 70% of American children's diet is ultra-processed.
A couple months ago, a certain presidential candidate who shall remain nameless endorsed another presidential candidate. In his endorsement speech, he said a lot of things that I wasn't sure were true about our health as a nation and as a world. Let's call this presidential candidate Junior.
Don't call me Junior.
In the wake of this endorsement, Time magazine launched an article questioning if ultra-processed foods are not as bad as we think. We'll come back to this later. Just to be clear, this is in no way an endorsement of any presidential candidate, but a fact check of some really bold claims about health that, if true, we should all be paying attention to. If you've seen my other content, you know that I'm never trying to sway you one way or another, and I encourage you to do your own research. And I've done plenty of other videos about how health and anything related to it are not political issues. With that said, I'm going to be as objective as possible, but there are some statements from the endorsement that I can't cover in this video for obvious reasons. The first claim Junior makes is that
we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe.
This one actually looks like it's true. The European Commission shows that France and Germany have some of the highest healthcare spending in Europe, with Germany spending about 5,600 euros per person and France spending about 4,500 euros per person in 2021. Which is about $6,150 and $4,900 per person respectively. Compare that to the $13,493 per person spent on healthcare in the United States in 2022. That's definitely at least twice as much. There are some countries in Europe that spend more per person than Germany, but there are also countries like Romania that spend far less. So we're spending, it seems, at least twice as much on healthcare as what they pay in Europe. The second claim is that
2/3 of American adults and children suffer from chronic health issues. 50 years ago, that number was less than 1%.
A study published in 2023 states that chronic disease affects 6 in 10 adults in the United States, while 4 in 10 adults live with multiple chronic diseases. So 6 out of 10 is definitely about 2/3. What's more concerning is the data from 2018 states 133 million, or nearly half of Americans, had a chronic disease back then. This shows that the chronic disease rate is actually growing. But what about the claim that 50 years ago the chronic disease rate was less than 1% in the United States? This one is more difficult. I managed to find one article stating that the number of children with chronic disease was less than 2% in 1960, but when I clicked the cited study, I was blocked by a paywall. And keep in mind, when looking for data that's older than 30 years or so, things get pretty tedious. I was able to find a lot of information about the mortality rate for the past 50 or 60 years, which has declined, but finding the exact chronic disease rate is difficult. It's possible that less than 1% of the United States suffered from chronic diseases 50 years ago, but the data just isn't readily available. If anyone can find this data or knows where this figure is coming from, please let me know in the comments below. Junior also states,
there's been an explosion of neurological illnesses that I never saw as a kid.
This article states that the number of people with diabetic neuropathy has more than tripled globally since 1990, rising to 206 million in 2021. This is in line with the increase in the global prevalence of diabetes. In addition, The Guardian published that 3.4 billion people worldwide, or 43% of the global population, has some sort of neurological condition. Lastly, one of the major global health institutions stated that over 1 in 3 people are affected by neurological conditions, the leading cause of illness and disability worldwide. Now, for some contrast, this article from the UK shows that around the year 2000, 6% of the population had some sort of neurological disorder. It seems that this explosion in neurological conditions isn't only true, but is happening across the world. Let me know what you think the consequences of this increase in neurological illnesses might be, or if you have any neurological issues of your own in the comments below. Also, if you learned something new or are enjoying the content so far, please hit the like button and consider subscribing.
Come on. Do it. Do it!
The truth is that none of this information should be surprising. We all either know someone with a chronic health condition or have one ourselves. But it's one thing to watch a video of someone rattling off statistics, and another thing entirely to find the sources to verify if the statements are true. With that said, Junior speculates that there are two primary causes for this extreme increase in chronic illness, one of which we'll cover in this video.
First and the worst is ultra-processed food.
Junior states about 70% of America's diet is ultra-processed, which he defines as being foods that include processed sugar, ultra-processed grains, and seed oils. While the mechanisms of this being a cause of chronic illness are still being investigated, this isn't new, groundbreaking, or fringe by any means. Time magazine previously put out articles about the dangers of ultra-processed foods. Heck, you can even go to the Harvard website right now and find their page about the dangers of ultra-processed foods. But the question is, does it make up 70% of the American diet? There's a study from the BMJ that states in 2009 to 2010, ultra-processed foods made up almost 60% of the American diet. So that's 10% less than Junior's statement. Debunked, right? Not exactly. Another study in the BMJ from 2024 shows that 57% of adult diets and 67% of children's diets were ultra-processed food as of 2018. With an upward trend, about 70% seems like a more than reasonable figure. One thing that I will debunk right now is the idea that this is exclusively an American phenomenon. In my years in South Korea, I've seen the pre-made food and frozen food sections go from one aisle or even a shelf or two to 3 or 4 aisles. In some cases, like 6 aisles of frozen foods that just didn't exist 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The thing about it, though, is processed foods go hand in hand with singular living conditions. It's true that people are eating more and more processed foods, but it's also true that more of us are living alone. Since a lot of us don't know how to cook, or don't know what foods promote health, or don't have time to cook, this leads to a spiral of decisions that can lead to chronic illness or worse. There's a lot more in this endorsement speech that I'd like to talk about, so let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make a part 2 to this video. It's crazy to me that any of this is controversial. The fact that in the wake of this speech, Time magazine changed their opinion about the dangers of ultra-processed foods is bonkers. But what do you think? Were you surprised by any of this information? Do you think that this should be a controversial issue? Do you suffer from a chronic illness or know someone that does? And do you think that diet has anything to do with it? Is this a partisan issue or a bipartisan issue, or is this an issue that is not political whatsoever? Whatever the case, we need to continue this conversation. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a like and let me know in the comments. I make videos by myself and any feedback helps immensely. Consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.